Just ask you how do you reconcile the fact that there are so many Eastern European nations such as Romania, Hungary, and other Eastern European nations who are producing top notch computer scientists, mathematicians, physicists, yet their state machinery is in a pretty bad shape, and the trust level within the population is fairly low on these service delivery institutions.
Okay, so I mean, this is where I also there's I mean we are already since morning sorry since the beginning I'm only talking on one side, right? Scientists communicating to the general public, but the scientists also need to be aware of the society, right? That's another importance. This is where humanities and social science should be totally integrated with natural sciences in education. Undergraduate education is what is the modern way believe is also because we as a citizen, first thing we should know ourselves as citizen of a place, of a country, right? Now you compared with, let's say, Romania or Hungary or a smaller country which produce Nokia mobiles in a large number, which is also although now Nokia is not that popular, but it set the trend in mobile technology, right? Small country, but there that history, if you look at it, they have belonged to one community of Europeans. They share their successes and failures as one community, right? It could be a variety of historical reasons, maybe a smaller countries, but if you look at the share, why, for example, looking at the tennis itself, right? The smaller European, Eastern European countries are producing fantastic tennis players, right? Because they, as a child, they do not distinguish, can I be a good athlete or a good sports person? They think that whole Europe is producing a lot number of good people, whether in football or in tennis and in other ones. They always think it's not that difficult for me. But we have a unique history, unfortunately too. That unique history of India, we cannot compare ourselves to any other country. We are only comparing with ourselves, and the country has so much of diversity. This diversity should have been a strength. Unfortunately, we are not using it as a strength. We are using it as a weakness many times, and we always look at our own immediate surroundings, right? To some extent, once Sachin Tendulkar actually tried to unite the whole country, not necessarily he thought about it, right? His achievement was an achievement for every Indians in this country, but it's not true in most places. We are always trying to segregate ourselves. Oh, in North Indian history, so success, South Indian, Eastern, Western, or this language speaking or this religious person's success stories. This is another problem with the society. We have our own baggage of our historical baggage.
As I'm totally agree with the basic science, but why there is a shift in the mood of a government? Like he's like government is shifting towards the not the basic science, the applied science. They want the product, and I guess I heard, maybe I'm not correct totally, but I've heard like the institutions are forced to get a product, then they will get a project, not when they produce a paper or publications. So I want to just know that what are your like views and what community, science community and professors are doing towards this like problem.
Okay, so there's nothing wrong in what the government is doing. We
Yes.
cannot blame anybody because they're all trapped in some kind of a cyclical problem now, right? Now, see the unless we have certain threshold of good scientists, basic science that's being happening, we can't think of large number of applied science happening all the time, right? So in the absence of which, government thinks that is only basic science is being done, not much applied science is being done. But there are good success stories applied science too, but it's not being communicated to the government also well, right? For example, developing even for a few years, when I clearly remember as a child, how much the smoke used to come from the kitchen. We were all used to stand in the queue to get kerosene and then use the kerosene stove to make some rice or dal. And my mother used to cry, not because of she was emotionally this one, is simply because of literally the smoke coming to her eyes. And one CSR lab developed a smoke-free kerosene stove. And of course, 1991 post-liberalization, the kerosene stove become sort of completely obsolete, and now we are all using gas or electric ones, right? But for about 10 years, she used this smoke-free kerosene stove, which was developed in a CSR lab. And that actually helped to reduce the suffering, right? Even this kind of success stories we are not communicating very well. The government will do well if they know these kind of things happening from the science labs. Now, it's also true that it's important that Science has to be used for societal problems. It's just that you cannot convert a basic scientist to an applied scientist. What the government should do as a strategy to increase the base of the basic science so that large number of applied scientists do emerge out of it. Typically what happens is, in any national advanced countries, if you look at it, 20% of the PhDs are the ones who continue to do basic science. 80% of the PhDs actually get into applied science or to teaching profession or to do other career opportunities. We are not generating jobs for those 80% of the people. Even India too, only 20% get into academia out of number of PhD students. Not necessarily that 80% in this room, but think of it, right? Overall, in SEAL, we are generating a huge number of them. We are not providing sufficient opportunity to do applied science. So you should not fund applied science at the cost of basic science. While basic science should be continued and expanded, and more applied science will emerge naturally, and you can also sort of have a setup to fund applied science. That should be the strategy.
So, according to like our views and like according the understanding of myself, like I think like there's a communication gap between the scientists and the government. So, is there anybody's like doing something or like there's
I
any
mean,
board?
that's what we have been talking about. It is we develop some policy papers, white papers, and we write articles. We send letters to government, ministers or secretaries and all. But again, many times it is also perceived as a self-serving, notes or documents and letters. So I guess it's important, again, as a society, we need to respect science. We need to respect our scientific achievements. We need to respect the value of science to the society. Forget about achievements. At least if you value the importance of science to society, automatically these things will come up.
From a school level, I've seen, I studied from a private college, so I had good teachers. But I've seen many government schools, there are never good teachers, even teachers don't come. So how do you think that this curiosity of science, the students asking basic questions, that's still not present in schools? People start thinking about research when they come to graduation or post graduation. They are exposed to labs that this happens. So how do you address this problem of igniting that curiosity in students?
I mean, I know it's a really a deep problem, because I told you, right, about 30 to 40 years of our education system, which is going completely in a wrong way, has created this big mess, and solving this kind of a problem overnight is almost impossible. So we need a lot of systemic changes. At the same time, we have to bring in a lot of lateral, support system. And so what are the various different ways you can do it? One is, so there are two ways of doing it. One is importance to the methods of teaching rather than the syllabus or the curriculum, right? Syllabus, not the curriculum, syllabus. Now, you can use the syllabus as case studies. It could be physics, it could be chemistry or biology, and where you use the same syllabus to teach the mathematical tools or mathematical methods, analytical skills and problem solving ability to students. And this should be the pedagogy part. So there are you can call it inquiry based teaching or research based teaching, or from the student perspective is inquiry based learning or research based learning. And you need to train teachers to do this, right? And teachers should know how to teach better. And there are many different workshops. For example, there are now, recently government has launched a new scheme called Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission for Teachers and Teaching. Under this scheme, the aim is to train as many teachers as possible in very different pedagogical methods for make the teaching more effective, right? From the science point of view, or from any education point of view, you can even history you can teach with using research-based pedagogical tool or inquiry-based method, right? Now we need to sort of get involved in this. So almost every major institutes, particularly central universities, IITs and IISERs, have one or other schemes under this national mission, right? And PhD students can get involved in this, undergraduate students get involved, postgraduate students can get involved in this as part of a team to go to schools to teach young students in front of the teachers. So teachers will pick up some good elements of teaching, or bring the teachers and train them on our campus And there are variety of different ways we can all get involved in this. So the government is already planning and in a big scale in various different ones. Outside the government system also, there are many NGOs are doing this. Azim Premji University is being a big way to investing in teachers training, and they're also looking for volunteers or even paid academic people, and at least their cost of expenses of travel and other things are taken care of. Want to get involved in teachers training and so on. So this is one way of lateral support system where all of us can get involved. If we 10-15% of our time we spend on this, we'll at least provide some support system. Now, many times the changing the larger community at the systemic level happens when the things become a buzzword. Let's say if you make when the mobile started, our computerization, I don't know how many of you remember, maybe some of you are not even born. Some of our politicians said, we don't want computers, it's going to take away the jobs of our poor people, so we're not going to allow computers to come to our state, computers to come to our India, computers to go to our government departments. But within 10 years, the same politicians can't even talk about not having computers. They have realized that computers have enabled people rather than took away the jobs, right? So when such successes or that methods become so obvious, people will take it. So if definitely the methods of teaching is effective, students will write examination better, they get good marks, or they will do well in their interviews, they get better jobs. Automatically, more and more teachers would like to follow that methods of teaching. So you can actually convert the psyche of teachers by actually telling them you will be more successful as a teacher by using this kind of a method, right? The school or college management would like to follow a method which is definitely more successful for the students, and ultimately that's what they are also looking for, right? To attract more students and collect more fees. It's also, you can convert it to a business model.
So, Professor Shashidhara, so what would be your suggestion to, let's say, the students, how an individual would be able to improve the scientific temperament, let's say, in the country, or have an outreach activity? Just as a student, what could one do? And eventually, when students grow up to become an independent PI also, how would they be able to, would you suggest that they could, or recommend that they overcome our inherent modesty, which is ingrained epigenetically by our culture, to be able to advertise or make our success a story? I think inherently we all tend to be, in India, extremely modest about something that we do also. So what would be your, as an individual, what do you suggest for to students and for now and later?
Well, the last part first. I don't think we are so modest anyway. We are sometime, look at the kind of, rhetoric many times we hear every day in our society, which is completely out of nothing, right? That's why it's called rhetoric. And in any way, that's not a very modest thing. That's what we, But yes, it's true that scientists many times may be modest, if not general public. And they don't talk about their science. There are two reasons. One is they think it is not understandable to general public, and the second is, this is not that great story to talk about, right? But again and again, I'm telling you that every story is big story when you talk to a person who is not doing research, right? For them, even if you're running an agarose gel electrophoresis to run, check the size of your DNA fragment that you've just isolated, is an exciting thing. Right? Look at it. Explaining central dogma of molecular biology to a general lay person, saying that this is what life is all about. This is what self means. This is what self versus non-self in biological system means, right? Or this is what distinguishes between living world versus non-living world, right? And these are the elements of biology that we know if we communicate to general public, which can be school kid or school teacher or a general public in a community event. And during that time, when you say, okay, not only that I'm talking about this, not just I've read it, I'm actually experimenting it. I can actually say, how DNA replication is controlled during cell division, right? How copying information, how, for example, the information is faithfully copied from generation to generation. That's what DNA replication error correction is all about, right? So you can even, those who are working on DNA damage checkpoint control, or those who are working on various aspects of DNA replication, irrespective of whether in the context of infectious disease or whether in the context of exploiting this for some development of a new drug, doesn't matter. But you can put it in the context in which more excites the students more. It's not that you need to talk about your work per se. You talk about the elements of your work which useful to communicate some aspect of science to the students, right? And once they know, scientific temperament is sort of it's I don't know how to explain this. A true scientist already has scientific temperament, right? Someone who has good understanding of science already has scientific temperament. So if someone doesn't have a scientific temperament, it means that person doesn't have a good understanding of science itself, right? Now again, when you say science itself, how much that person knows physics or how much does know biology, it's not that. The says is how people have understood an objective truth, right? That's what begins the scientific temperament. Scientific temperament is basically, let's say, there are others who may be better than me in thoughts. There are other solutions who may be better than my solutions. Or there are other people who also have equal rights on this planet or on this room or in this queue or in this restaurant. And this is what scientific temperament. That comes when you have a good understanding of the methods of science, right? So, for example, if you say there is nothing like let's say if someone has expressed an opinion, that opinion can be disputed. That opinion can have a relative meaning to it in the context, whereas when the scientists talk about it, they actually can talk about something which has an absoluteness to it, right? Although not everything we say has an absoluteness, because we not have acquired enough knowledge or produced enough knowledge, right? For example, now physicists can claim that an electron is electron whether it's on behaves exactly the same whether it's on sun at whatever the temperature in sun, or on earth, or somewhere which is much colder than earth, right? Electron behavior will not change. They can sort of confidently claim, except under certain specific conditions. That also they can define what conditions electron behavior may change. But we biologists may not be able to claim to that extent absoluteness in biological system. First of all, biological system is not that homogeneous. It's very diverse. That's why it's biology around physics. And at the same time, there are many things in biology we don't know. So what we say is today may not be the truth of tomorrow. But as long as we mention this to the public, saying that as of today, this is our understanding. Tomorrow understanding may differ. Today, this is how we cure cancer, right? You will survive with some side effect. Somehow you manage for 6 months, you will get cured, and maybe you'll survive for 5 years, 10 years is one thing. But you can also say that there is also a possibility that tomorrow we'll have better understanding of cancer, we'll have a better cure without side effects. People may survive much longer, right? That automatically builds scientific temperament amongst the public.
In line with ma'am's last question, so have we in a way failed in inculcating the scientific temper in our society? And secondly, do as a scientific community we appreciate science in its proper way, or have we also failed by distinguishing between science and technology?
I don't know how you say whether failed or not failed. Now, 80% of Americans apparently are creationists, right? They don't believe in evolution. They think the earth is not more than 15,000 year old or 5,000 year old, whatever you can call, right? So in a way, then are they not scientifically, temperament? Do they have scientific temperament? Now, it has some relative, right? Whether the acquiring scientific knowledge is scientific temperament, or how you behave in the society, is what scientific temperament. My feeling is how you behave in the society is scientific. What solves the problem? How you solve the problem? That's where the scientific temperament comes, right? Now, there is nothing like 100% scientific temperament. It's an ideal situation, right? Nehru's view of scientific temperament is really an ideal condition. Like in the Gandhian view of religion, Gandhian view of a village in India is really an ideal situation. It may not be practical all the time, which is not practical, which we have changed so much ourselves. And some, there's no regret also. To some extent, there's a regret because we may have moved far away from Gandhian values. But no, Gandhian, not values. It would be a big, deep regret if we move away from Gandhian values. We have Gandhian economy, if we have moved away from this, it may not be a regret. In the changing condition, we also need to change. But when it comes to scientific temperament, we have a moderate success, you can say. We don't say we have failed. We have moderate success. Even today, we are living in a good democratic world. Within just 60 years of 70 years of say democracy now, we have not got into so much of civilian disputes or problems in this country as living as one country with such much of diversity, more diversity than Europe, right? And that itself is, I think there is somewhere in built-in scientific temperament which may not be visible on day-to-day conversation, right? And my feeling is a thriving democracy means there is scientific temperament in the society. That means you respect someone else's opinion. You are ready to change your opinion, right? That's what scientific temperament is also about. In democracy, you are ready to change your opinion, right? You vote today for one person, 5 years later you may open to another person and say that, yeah, I changed my opinion, I found out this person didn't deliver well, or this person's opinion I don't buy now anymore. You want to change it. So that's how democracy thrives, right? And I think we are working very well.
So we have been discussing so much about kindling this scientific temperament in students or in people. So do you think that all the pedagogues involved in this, do they need to have some kind of experience in research, or just measures taken to improve their style of this pedagogy will do?
Okay, so no, I think it's important to have some experience of research. And when we say research, it doesn't have to be a research kind of research that we do where we want to, pursue new knowledge. We want to produce new knowledge. Even if when known knowledge, if they rediscover, that's also research as a pedagogical tool, right? It's not necessary that, for example, many of our laboratory, in the colleges, or even in schools, there used to be small laboratory sessions. In colleges was a mandatory that you have to go through 3 hours of physics, chemistry, or math or biology laboratories. Those ones are basically many times is rediscovering something. They would give you, something and you say, can you tell you which element it is, right? You do a series of experiments, say it is magnesium or something, you would come out with, right? Or sometimes you'll say, okay, here is an organism, can you tell us, what would be the pH inside the cell of this organism and kind of stuff, right? So these are the kind of experiment we do. It may not lead to papers, it may not to do kind of research that a PhD student is doing, but as a pedagogical tool, it's still research, right? This is the kind of research pedagogy which I am talking about. I'm not talking about whatever 200 million people doing research in this country, right? 200 million people, when they go to college, they use research as a pedagogical tool to learn how to solve problems, right? How to ask questions, how to define, how to define question, and how to address that question using systematic methods. And that's what research is all about. And that's what will help them in their life later.
So my question is on education policy. So sometime back when Kapil Sibal was Science and Technology Minister, he announced that if anybody who is even in school or college can choose what subject, whatever is of interest to him or her. Suppose somebody is studying commerce and if he is interested in bio, he can choose that subject. So I want to ask, do you not think that will generate more interest of general public in science?
Okay, so the question that you are asking is, should we sort of change our education system to liberal arts program, right? Now, liberal arts program in American typical university system means you walk into a university and you don't decide whether you want to learn Shakespeare or whether you want to learn some economics or some entrepreneurship, or you may learn theoretical physics or cell biology or developmental biology, evolution kind of stuff, right? So that's liberal program. And in that liberal arts program, not only that you take decision what you want to learn later, you continuously sort of experiment between different subjects. You can be pursuing English literature as one subject, and at the same time you will be pursuing theoretical physics as the other subject. So that kind of liberal art program is what the government was thinking. I think it's already being encouraged successfully in multiple governments. In the current system in IITs and IISERs, already this is being promoted, where a student can take not only the natural sciences and engineering subject in IITs, they can also take some humanities and social science courses. But many times they have become part of a fixed curriculum. So you have fixed number of courses in this discipline, another fixed number of courses in humanities, social science. So there is not much flexibility. And in the absence of flexibility, students think that it has become sort of routine and mandatory, and then lose interest. So what we are trying in IISER Pune, for example, is every student can make their own basket full of courses. There is nothing like you have to take this course. There is nothing like major, minor, mandatory course or elective objective. Every course is an elective. Every course is an optional course. Only thing fixed, we say this, you have to take at least 23 credits of courses in a semester. Or overall in 5 years, you have to complete 236 course credits. That's the only condition we put in. Then how they come to 236 credits is completely left to the students, right? So they may take some courses from here, some courses from there. Now, this is one way of increasing the flexibility and promoting liberal art program. But second is, you also have to make it interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary. They should understand the connectivity between the science and society, or how society have evolved over the time, last, let's say, since the agriculture, let's say 12,000 years, and what is the role of science and technology in that evolution of societies. I don't know how many of you have read this book, Jared Diamond's Guns, Gems and Steel. I think it's a really a textbook, like a book one can prescribe, which basically helps you to learn almost every disciplines of science, along with some linguistics, history, literature, and everything. Understand societies, right? So we need to develop the courses which connect these kind of things. We need to develop courses which connect social science to humanities, and natural sciences to humanities, and humanities to natural sciences both. I think it's very important to have a liberal arts program in this country.
So one more thing I want to ask. Sometime back we were hearing just to increase the number of PhD students in India, so there will be no entrance exam. So do you think, is it really effective?
So increasing the number of PhD students, I say yes, but removing the entrance examination or some selection for PhD students, I say no. It's simply because our education system is not as matured enough to produce every potential postgraduate to be a PhD student, right? So we have been talking about the problems of school education and undergraduate education in this country, because over the last 60 to 70 years there has been no research in the education system, and many teachers don't do research themselves. Now think of a postgraduate student coming out of a university who is taught by a school teacher who has never seen a cell under a microscope, taught by a college teacher who has not seen a cell under a microscope, and now they want to do some cell biology, right? There's no way you can think that this student has a sufficient training. Now you can say, okay, then it's not that person's problem, it is a problem of the society, problem of the system. Then why should we deprive that person out of the one? So one way is we can actually have an intermediate. That's what we started this so-called master's program, 2-year master's program, which is mandatory for India's PhD program, right? In West, it's not required. 4-year BS program in US University or a 3-year tripos program in UK University is good enough for a PhD program. You don't need to do a master's. But in India, we need to masters, because that helps to student develop some research skills before they get into PhD program. So I think currently we need to increase, because as I told you, we have far less number of scientists per million population in this country compared to many other countries. And India can afford now, with growing economy, and more technology, science and technology competent people are needed in this country to deploy technology for the welfare of the society. The second is to improve that number, we cannot compromise on the quality, and we may have to go through 2-3 generations of this selection process of our PhD students to take them as PhD students in our labs. until our primary and secondary education and of course tertiary education system is much improved.
I want to extend my first question that you said ki this, I agree, this freedom of selecting some specific subjects is present in IIT and IISER, right? But I want to ask, so is it going to happen in any university sometime? Because it will generate general public interest in science, because if you do this at school, at college level.
So the liberal arts program, I think is people slowly thinking in universities too. It's easier in autonomous institutes, right? Because you don't need to stick to one particular framework, curriculum framework. Many universities, they had to follow UGC system. So unless UGC changes its system, it's difficult for the universities. Even today, they say unless you have a MSc major, you cannot, MSc major in zoology, you can't become a lecturer in zoology department, right? For example, I never done so-called zoology, right? I don't do animal developmental biology. I can teach any zoology, whatever the zoologist teacher would teach in a zoology department, but officially I cannot be a professor of zoology in a university system, right? I don't have a right degree. So this is where the problem comes. Unless UGC changes, they cannot do that. But the private universities are doing it. Private autonomous universities, which do not need to stick to UGC system, they are already incorporating this. Many central universities, many IITs and NITs and IISERs are doing it simply because they are autonomous, they are degree awarding institutions. There is some flexibility in playing around with the curriculum.
Hi sir, my question is regarding machines. Why we are not producing our indigenous machines?
Just a matter of economy. It's a business, right? Now, you are in a biology institute, you understand, if I give you an example from biology, right? All molecular biologists use one or other Eppendorf item, right? Eppendorf is a company which supplies, biological research material. It could be a consumable or it could be a small equipment like PCR machine, right? The entire sales of Eppendorf in India, right, is not even 1/4 of what they sell in Boston city alone, right? Now, why would they like to make a PCR machine in India, right? Because there's no big market, right? Now you can say, okay, fine, an Indian company can start. They can start selling it. The problem is, again, the market is not big enough for them to invest and make cheaper PCR machines and compete with a company like Eppendorf. They will anyway, they can always bring down the price and, outcompete an Indian company. It's simply the market game. But look at the mobile phone, for example, right? Now it has, initially we were thinking that we are always dependent on Nokia, right? Of course, not Nokia iPhones and say, Galaxies and then all the Xiaomi's and Viomi's and started coming in, but there are now many Indian made mobile phones available. But here, the market economy functions very well. Even if you are not that good quality products you are making, or you cannot compete in the segment of 10,000 rupee mobiles, you can compete with 500 rupee, 1,000 rupee mobiles, right? But that also has a market. In a population where 1 billion people can use mobile phones, it's not like soap, right? The soap bars, if you look at every small district in India has its own brand of soap bars, which is cost them like 1 rupee, 2 rupees. Maybe there's a national level competition for amongst the Dow and Lux or whatever the big brand names. But if you look at this, the smaller segment company, they are there in small district. They are producing enough for sell like 1 lakh per month or 1 lakh per year. But that they're enough for a small family-owned company to sell soaps, right? That's how the mobile technology has come now. A small family-owned factory can produce a few thousand mobiles a month and sell it and earn enough money for their comfortable living and have a Mercedes-Benz still at home, right? Unless we reach that, not necessarily that we need to reach that level of penetration for scientific instruments, unless we increase the reach of the scientific instrument 3 to 4 fold more, you cannot even think of producing this. But already is happening. For example, in consumable it's happening. Now, Taq polymerase is largely produced here. Oligos are now synthesized in India. Sequencing is done in India itself, right? Earlier, we used to send out to other countries to get some oligos synthesized or sequencing done for our samples, right? So some things are happening, but it takes some more time. We need, community is much smaller to have that kind of a scientific instrument being manufactured in India.
As you already said that only 20% students who are in educational institutes or even higher education institutes will stay in basic science, and 80% probably would go into applied sciences. But a lot of applied science actually requires teamwork, which is not actually present somehow in India. We are a lot more individualistic society. How do we, as a faculty, how would you try to inculcate this type of ideas? Because the teamwork goes into putting some machine together, for example. So what is your opinion on that?
Okay, so see, the problem of education system is, as Professor Kedar Kare mentioned, is we are individual centric. We want our individual achievements to be shown all the time. So we don't want to share our results. We don't even, although copying is really, sort of endemic in this country, but still students don't want to share their, results with others, thinking that they have to share the grade or share the authorship, right? So even in my lab, I'm facing this problem, having large number of authors of a paper, so that quality of the paper improves and you can have publish in a much high impact journals and everything. Is very difficult in India simply because PhD students compete among themselves. They don't want to share. Every experiment they want to do themselves. So in a way, they take 6-7 years to do PhD, whereas in outside the country, in 2 years they do, or 3 years they finish PhD, but there will be enough to publish in a big impact journal, but they'll have to share with another 3 or 4 PhDs. When many times there are 3 equal first authors, sometimes 2 equal first authors, some kind of thing. Or you are second author in one and first author in another one, so you'll have 2 papers, out of your PhD. These are all things which are happening in outside the world, outside the country. Now, one way of improving this quality is to make our pedagogy itself, where the people work in teams, like group discussions, right? Instead of telling them that, you write this assignment or you make presentation, you will get some marks or grades, you can say a group can work together, and the whole group the grading will be decided based on the overall performance of the assignment, written assignment, and or presentations, right? So this way they will develop some kind of way of working in teams so that everybody's grade will improve, right? If someone doesn't do well, everybody's grade will come down, right? So they have to work in good team spirit. So they have to, that's one way of improving the quality. So we are doing it, it's actually many times it's practically okay. 300 to 400 students these days we are, taking per year, 200 students in IISERs and maybe 800 students in old IITs and 400 students in new IITs. Now teaching like a subject like physics or mathematics to that many number of students so difficult, so you need to divide them into smaller groups. So here you can also give assignments in groups, so then faculty can, evaluate only 10 assignments rather than 100 assignments if a 10-member group come out with one assignment. So that's on one advantage, the method. Similarly, the lab work, we can always come out with a very unique undergraduate level research projects which work in a team that produces enough for what a PhD student may produce in 1 year. Let's say 20 undergraduate students may take still 1 year, but they produce enough data for one PhD student to start something new, project. Many times an adventurous project, PhD students would like to take it up because they are worried about their PhD, they're worried about their papers. Whereas an undergraduate students can do a genetic screen, for example. It could be an esoteric genetic screen. You may not want to do it. And you can ask 10 undergraduate students to work in a team and come out with some good results. And grading will be how systematically you have done the screen, not necessarily the result that they get, but the method they have followed and rigor in which they have evaluated the results, and that's on some way of developing the team spirits. This is what I'm telling you, the basic scientific research level. You can always think of introducing some entrepreneurship or such kind of applied research related courses in the curriculum, where a team of students can actually work. Some IITs have tried this, build a satellite. It took in College of Engineering in Pune. They built a satellite, now it's launched through one of our recent launches. It took about 10 years for them to build the satellites. 3 or 4 different batches of students have come to the college and left, but everybody contributed bit a bit, right? And that's how they come out with really a good functional satellite. So, I mean, this is a way of, inculcating the team spirit required for applied research.
So one more question, little bit different. We often talk of the science technology policies changing with government, but as a scientific community, is there some kind of agreement or consensus on meaning how much should we allocate to basic science and how much should we allocate to applied science?
Yeah, this is sort of related to an earlier question that why government is always insists on applied research. Why don't they think of basic science? The problem is also the time scale, and the results of a basic science, which helps us to realize that we have produced some fantastic new knowledge, like discovering gravitational waves, to applying it for some societal welfare, like developing a vaccine. It takes 10 to 15 years, sometimes 20 years, right? No government which has to face the election every 5 years would like to wait and invest in a LIGO project and say that 20 years later I will claim that I'm the one who supported this project which led to the discovery of gravitational waves and kind of stuff. So that's the problem of a political system, or any democratic political system. It's not only in India, it happens in other countries too. Whereas applied research, people think that you can actually get quick results, which is also not true, which is again lack of understanding of the scientific methods. Like for example, a vaccine, right, would take years and years to develop a vaccine. Many times he may not be even successful. Out of 10 researchers who are trying to develop vaccine, only 2 or 3 may become successful. And that time also may take 10, 15, 20 years. A drug typically takes minimum 10 years because the kind of clinical, preclinical trials and clinical trials you have to go through, right? So I guess one has to know the scientific methodology to take these kind of policy decisions. But typically the governments function because they want quick returns. So that's why they don't want to invest in education, because the impact of education will take at least 30 to 40 years to realize it. What we invested in 60s and 70s has resulted in 80s in IT revolution, 80s and 90s of IT revolution, right? In 60s, when the computer science department in IIT Kanpur started in 1960s, when no one knew anything about computers, like anywhere else in the world, forget about India. And that led to IT revolution of 90s across the world, not just in India, but India contributed greatly to this, right? So this is where scientists can actually say, okay, we should partition this much fund for basic research, this much for applied, this is for short-term goals, this is for long-term goals and everything, but it's difficult to convince the government many times. And often scientists also have some different opinion, depending on how much applied science a scientist is doing. Sometimes they think that everything should go into basic applied science, not for basic science. Some people think everything should be basic science or applied, nothing for applied science. Automatically the basic science will get converted to applied science when they realize there is an application of the science that they are doing. So I mean, right now the reason we are not good at in science policy amongst the scientists is we are also not trained in science policy. That requires a completely different mindset. We are all, as though we have fewer number of scientists, most of us are trained to do our own research in our own laboratories. It could become, theoretical or it could be experimental. Let's say it's still a laboratory, right? In our own laboratories. But how many of us actually see outside world? How many of us see outside, communicate with outside people? Outside people means people are outside the scientific community, and understand the very different dynamics of the society, and then only we can develop a good policy and recommend to the government, right? So there is also lack of expertise in this. Even in US, now it's apparently there even less. Earlier in early 20th century, it was very less. Somewhere between 1960s and 70s, a very good scientist, accomplished scientist, but extremely well knowledgeable about society and its dynamics, and in diplomacy and in politics and everything, they could influence the government very well, right? In amongst our generation, Harold Warmus, a Nobel laureate biologist, is very good in dealing with politicians and trying to explain in a language which they understand very well. Right? We also need, that is a skill. So amongst the alternate careers for scientists, one of them is science policy, and how to communicate, how to frame policy, and how to communicate this policy to uninformed people, which is an art.
So how to motivate people right now, those who are doing research to the basic science, because people are moving from basic science to applied one.
Realizing that what knowledge you have produced is almost like a landmark discovery, or your knowledge has a certain application, will still take quite some time, right? So that process, if you understand well, then you will be more patient, right? And you will be continuously excited to do science, because as long as in a day-to-day basis, I understand. I mean, we also done PhD. Every day I had to counsel my PhD student. Sometimes, let's say, for example, in my lab, one of my PhD students is doing what is known as ChIP-seq, right? I'm sure everybody know what ChIP-seq is. And we are doing it on a tissue which has to be isolated from larvae of Drosophila. It's a very laborious work. And a whole day she would be sitting under the microscope, and then isolate some disc and try to do chromatin isolation, and something fails, right? And if you do 3 times, and you know what kind of a state of mind you would be, and how to sort of motivate such kind of a student that what you're doing is really important, and what you'll continue. One day you'll be successful.
That's my question. How to motivate in that?
How to motivate. This is where the people should realize that the methods of science has these kind of failures, because every failure is actually a step forward and not backward, right? So the problem is all of us, even PIs, many times they think that not producing a result on a day or a week or a month is actually a failure of the student. Failure of the student is not coming to the lab. That's the only thing. Once they come to the lab, right, you see, as long as they have done the experiment, I always consider that is already a step forward. For example, these conditions are not good for ChIP-seq, so you already have improved, right? So I guess it takes some time. It requires certain different type of mindset. But I mean, so many times success stories helps, because these success stories have gone through the similar kind of failures, right? And they have become successful after failed several times, right? And that also need to tell them, right? You have to be your perseverance, your patience, and your how meticulous record keeping is, why it is so important to identify errors in your experiments. All those things, if they can get convinced, or if they understand well, then they get motivated on a daily basis.